A Fowl Truth.
By Grace.
And Joseph. Have you ever wondered what kind of chicken you're eating? It might seem like an odd question, but supposedly there's a bunch of different types of our favorite fowl, right? There are Jersey Giants, Americanas, Lamona, Plymouth Rock, and Buff Orpingtons. In fact, there are hundreds of kinds of chickens.
Chickens are really smart animals, in fact. They have complex social organizations. They've been shown to have a concept of past, present, and future. They have object permanence, which is more than we can say for infant human beings, and they often outperform dogs and cats in cognitive functions. In fact, chickens are often shown to have personality, and people who keep chickens know the levels of their chicken.
So why do we never hear what kind of chicken we're eating? Meet the factory chickens. There are only two kinds of chickens that we really farm now. Broiler chickens, as shown in the picture on top, and layer chickens, as displayed in the bottom.
These chickens come to us genetically engineered for extreme efficiency. Broilers have been developed to provide maximum amounts of breast meat, and layers have the highest egg-laying capacity.
Heat lamps in the hatchery are used to replace the warmth the chickens' broody mothers would have provided. At this stage, they go through a process called debeaking, where a hot blade sears off this nerve-rich area. The same process is used to clip the toes.
Unfortunately, laying eggs go through a gender selection process, layer chicks. Roosters from egg-laying breeds don't have any value because they aren't needed for reproduction, they can't lay eggs, and because the breed of the broiler chickens has been perfected so much, it seems a waste to raise these animals for their meat because it would be so lean compared to that breed. So, 50% of all baby chicks born in a hatchery are killed because they are male.
The beak is equivalent to our hands. This appendage is what they use to interact with the world. So debeaking robs the chicks of a major source of sensory input. And although this process prevents feather pecking and cannibalism in frustrated chickens, many chicks suffer grave injuries. Due to trauma, blood loss, and stress, chicks may die instantly, or over a period of time because of dehydration and starvation, because the chicks are unwilling or unable to eat or drink. This process is carried out so quickly now that it's about 15 chicks a minute. And because it's carried out quickly, it allows for more room for error.
You've got mail. If the chicks survive being born in these conditions and being debeaked, they're shipped off to factory farms. In fact, there's no laws protecting these chicks as they're being transported. This is such a dangerous time that 4% die during the process. In fact, the system counts on this, and so they use these extra chicks as packing peanuts. This ensures that there's not too much open space in the boxes and that the minimum ordered amount of chicks arrive alive.
60 to 90,000 chickens are crammed into a single building. Although their beaks are severed, they still attempt to peck each other due to their frustration and confinement. These are the broiler chickens. When it is time for these broiler chickens to die, sometimes they are clubbed to death and sometimes their heads are cut off, but more often than not, they are hung upside down in a conveyor belt with their throats slit, slowly bleeding to death and writhing in pain. Some are then placed headfirst in tubes that restrict their movement as they die.
For layered chickens, they have a lot longer lifespan than the meat birds. When they grow up, it starts every year. There are more than 280 million hens that lay 77.3 billion eggs, a stat that was collected in 2007. Once these chicks finish the mailing process. They're all crammed into a small, dark room for the next 20 weeks while their bodies will grow to maturity to where they can lay eggs. The layer chickens are then put into these baskets. As you can see, the baskets are slanted on the bottom, which causes the chickens to have to stand up constantly. There's up to a minimum of 4 chickens in each of these little baskets. A lot of times they'll get their heads or feathers or feet or other things caught into the wire cages. They're not individually looked after, so a lot of times they will end up dying of dehydration or starvation because they can no longer reach their feed. This graph shows the amount of space that the chickens have. As you can see, standard battery cages, which is what they're called, are 86 inches. In fact, this is one of the most generous estimates I saw during my research. As you can see, none of these cages are large enough for any of these types to put their wings out across them. But not to mention that they're in there with 3 to 8 other birds, so they most certainly can barely move around at all. And so these shows other types of cages that would be better for the animals to live in as well. The effects that most of these birds face is muscle atrophy because they can't move at all, so they lose basically all their muscles. Their bones are so fragile, if they're ever handled, they break all their bones because they're just so weak. In fact, sometimes their spinal cords just deteriorate, which makes them paralyzed, and then they can no longer get any of their food. A lot of times they get stuck in their cage on the wire in their cages, and then they die again from dehydration and starvation. Most of them have blisters and sores because they're just sick animals. And a lot of times they will also just die from exhaustion because they are pushed so hard to lay so many eggs, and they have to stand up all of their life. One of the ways that they are pushed really hard is that they do forced molting. Molting is a process that speeds up their egg production because naturally chickens would have periods of time where they wouldn't lay as many eggs and then they would start laying again. And so this causes them to skip that period of time, which they might rest their body, and so they starve them for 2 to 4 weeks to cause this egg production to start up again. Layer chickens typically are called spent after 1 to 2 years of their life, which means they no longer produce enough eggs to be considered valuable to whatever farm owns them. It's estimated that natural laying chickens would live 5 to 8 years before they would stop, and in fact the breed of chickens now lay 250 eggs compared to 100 eggs a year that chickens in more natural farms lay. They're killed in all sorts of ways. Usually the cheapest and easiest way possible for their owners. For the most part, they just are just like electrocuted or suffocated or just burned up or some way to dismantle their body. Occasionally they'll be shipped off to another factory where they will be made into chicken broth or dog food.
So how did we get here? Well, in 1923, Celia Steele received an accidental shipment of 500 chicks instead of the 50 that she ordered. Instead of getting rid of them, however, she experimented with keeping them inside for the winter. And it worked. And because it worked, she kept ordering more and more chicks. In 1926, her flock was 10,000, and in 1935, she had over 250,000. While the average flock size in America in that time period was still 23. Steele's birds never would have survived if it were not for the recently discovered benefits of adding vitamins A and D to the feed. In fact, a plethora of new technologies coalesced into the arrival of the first factory farm. Soon, more developments for factory farms appeared. Hybrid corn, government subsidies, the debeaking process, and automated fans and lights that could regulate growing cycles. In 1946, the poultry industry launched a Chicken of Tomorrow campaign, trying to engineer a bird that produces more breast meat with less feed. The winner was a red-feathered Cornish New Hampshire cross, giving the broad-breasted appearance. In the 1940s, sulfa drugs and antibiotics were introduced, stimulating growth and suppressing disease caused by confinement. By the 1950s, there was not one chicken of tomorrow, but two, one for eggs and one for flesh. The very genetics of these birds were manipulated to produce more and more. There were once dozens of breeds of chickens raised in the U.S. that we farm. Now we have factory chickens. Poultry companies now own the genetic pool, the birds themselves, the requisite drugs, the feed, the slaughtering, the processing, and the market brands. Today, chickens are so genetically grotesque that they cannot be allowed to live more than about 49 days. They grow so fast that their bodies are not able to support them. As an example, KFC's chickens live an average of 39 days.
The meat birds.
Tyson, for example, is the biggest meatpacking company in the history of the world. The industry changed the entire way that chicken are raised. Birds are now raised and slaughtered in half the time they were 50 years ago, but now they're twice as big. People like to eat white meat, so they redesigned the chicken to have large breasts. They not only changed the chicken, they changed the farmer. Today, chicken farmers no longer control their birds. A company like Tyson owns the birds from the day they're dropped off until the day that they're slaughtered.
There are no laws or regulations concerning the transport of chickens, which means that you can just mail chickens in the USPS. The National Chicken Council has guidelines for broiler chickens, but only on a voluntary basis and with voluntary audits. United Egg Producers has guidelines for cage layers with third-party auditing and labeling.
The European Union has gone as far to ban battery cages, but in the United States it's done on a state-by-state basis, with California and Michigan leading the fight with phasing out battery cages in chicken farming coming in the year 2015 and 2016. Here's where you can get all of our information that we found about chickens and lead you to more resources.